So I often tell my classes it took me 34 years to get my bachelor's degree, and there really is a reason for it. Part of it was me, but a big part of it was that I didn't have the tools. I had a typewriter. I can't spell. Formatting manually was always very difficult for me. It just never made perfect sense to use a typewriter because I'd have to write the papers out by hand, and then someone would have to type it in, or I had to type it in verbatim. Then if you make changes, everything gets all messed up, and you retype it. You end up retyping the paper 5 or 6 times. So it was when I finally got access to a word processor, something that would allow me to do standard formatting, something that would allow me to do easy edits, something that would allow me to easily do footnotes and citations and all of that stuff. Suddenly life got easier, and I was able to finish the rest of my degrees in fairly good fashion, basically because I learned how to use Word. So this video is really an attempt to show you how to do some of the stuff you need to know how to do for my class. So we're going to talk about formatting. We're going to talk about citations. We're going to talk about block quotes. We're talking about default settings for the spell checker and the grammar checker. And so basically I'm going to try to cover the stuff that I think you need to know in order to do the work, not only in my class, but this should help you in other classes as well. So before we go any farther, I want to cover a few specifics. These are generic to all of the papers in any of my courses. They probably are very similar to what you have in other classes, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So first of all papers turned in should be double spaced. Indent the first line 1/2 inch. And I'll show you how to do all these settings in just a real quick minute. There should be no extra space between paragraphs. Most of you, when you got Word initially, or when you accessed Word initially, it had a default to stick extra space between paragraphs. And what I want you to do is go in, and I'll show you how to do that. Go in and set that so that it doesn't automatically insert spaces, because I'm always marking little arrows, too much space, remove space, etc. And it's really something that you can do in just a couple of clicks, and you will never have the problem again. But it's necessary in order for your papers to all be standard, so that they all look alike. Why do they all look alike? So that when I'm looking at it, I know exactly how many words there are per page. I know whether you're padding, etc., etc. So it's just to make it consistent. I don't want a cover page or folder. Very few, if any, papers are going to be turned in physically in your class. Most of it's going to be done electronically through Google Drive or something comparable to that. But I don't need a cover page. I don't want a cover page. Even though it's not wasting any paper, it's not necessary. Simply put the header at the top of the page and enter your title and start writing on the very first page. On the first page, I do want the name, the date, and the course number. That way I know, even though you're in the right place, you might, for some reason, have put it in the wrong place. So this is just easier for me to keep it clear. I want that in the upper left or right-hand corner, and I want it single-spaced. You can always go back and reformat it. If the default's double and it comes out that way, go back and make it single-spaced before you try to turn it in. I also want 1-inch margins all the way around. Now, different versions of Word have had different defaults. They've had 1 1/4, they've had 1 1/2. Maybe yours are set to 3/4. But if you set them all to 1-inch margins, then I know that you are not padding, essentially. If you have margins other than 1 inch, then it's harder for me to gauge, just by looking at the page, how many words you have on there. And that's important. This is a W class, or if it isn't a W class, at least I'm requiring very similar requirements. And word count is important, and I use how the page is filled up to ascertain what it is, in addition to using the automatic counters in Word. And I want the pages numbered, but I don't want the first page numbered. So I will also show you how to do that. And if you follow those, at least your formatting is going to be absolutely perfect. So what we're looking at right now is a couple of pages from a document I wrote a while back. The content doesn't matter. It's the formatting that I want us to talk about. So the first thing I want us to look at is essentially the paragraph setup. So if we go over here to home, and you notice that there are all these styles. These are called styles, and they set up different types of formatting. And if you learn how to use these, they will help you a great deal. So normally, every document defaults to the, no pun intended, normal template. These are templates that give formatting instructions to Word. And so you'll see that this particular paragraph that I'm at right now is formatted with the normal format. And if we go up here and we look at the actual formatting for it, we'll notice that it is exactly what I just talked about. Double space, 0 points after, 0 points before. We want the first line indented by 1/2 inch, and we want it aligned left. We're not doing any outline levels. Some people like to do justified. Don't do it. It makes it harder to read, and they all should be left justified here. So that's your very first thing. Now, if your normal isn't set up like that, set it to look just like this. Click OK. Now go up to the normal style in your style bucket here. Right click on it, and you will see Update Normal to Match Selection. If you click that, that will save in your template these settings for normal. And now every time you go into it, they'll be there. So a couple things I want to talk about that we're going to do here. That's how to set the defaults. The other thing I want to do at this particular point is I want to insert page numbers. And if you remember right, I told you that I wanted page numbers, and I don't want the first page numbered. So here I'm at the bottom of page 1 right here. This is page 2, page 3, page 4. So what we're going to do is going to go to Insert, and then go over to Page Number. Now, I don't really care where you put them. I tend to put them at the bottom of the page, and I tend to put them way over on one side. That's just my preference. I don't care. You can center them, you can put them on the top, you can put them on the bottom. Don't put them in the margins. Just put them either in the top footer, the top header, or the bottom footer. So I'm going to pick, in this case, to put it over in this corner. Now, look right here, right where I am right now. See where the mouse is? It says Different First Page, and you'll notice here is page 1. If I click this button, that goes away, but then they continue to be on page 2. So here's where it was. Here's where page 2 goes. And so what I want to do now is I want to show you how to set up some defaults in the proofing tools that Word provides. Again, I've said before, if you're using a different word processor, I'm assuming that these functions exist. They are in most modern word processors, but I don't know where they are, so you'll have to find them. They're also maybe in a different place depending on your version of Word, or whether you're using Windows, or whether you are using the the Mac version of it. So Windows, Mac, other word processors, they're all going to be a little bit different, but I would imagine that most of these functions exist in most of these applications. So here we are back in our document, and I want to go up to the File menu and then down to Options. And this is where we're going to get the chance to set the settings that will be your defaults throughout. And so here we go to Proofing Tools. Usually it's, at least in the different versions of Word that I have, it's usually about the third one down on this Options menu. Proofing. Now, ignoring words in uppercase, that's your option. If you that way it won't tell you things like UNESCO or spelled wrong. But if you think you're going to need to check uppercase words, then you should turn that one on. I tend to leave it off. Ignore words that contain numbers, ignore internet and file addresses, so URLs won't be spell checked. Flag repeated words. That one's crucial because very often we'll be typing and we'll type an extra the, or something like that. This will flag that and let you know that it happens. If you're not writing in French, don't care about that. Most of you don't have separate custom dictionaries, so just leave that blank and it'll sort that out. French modes, again, you're not using it. If you also use Spanish as well as English in your word processor, you might want to set some of the settings here. These are not the crucial ones. These up here I do care about. And then as we scroll down a little bit, we see when correcting spelling and grammar in Word, ... check spelling as you type. That way it'll catch them as you make the errors. Mark grammar errors as you type. Frequently confused words, that's the blue squiggles, where the word is spelled right, but it's the wrong word in that particular context. And then check the grammar with the spelling, and that's really, really important. This readability statistics, this will allow you to see what grade level you're writing at. Most newspapers, for example, are written on a 6th grade level. Magazines are written probably at an 8th to 10th grade level. Most college textbooks are written on a 10th grade level for lower division classes. They go up from there. But this would allow you to actually see at what level you're writing. And if you're coming up, at pretty low levels, you might want to start thinking about your word choices, your sentence structures, things like that. Now, this is where the most important thing is right here where it says grammar and more. In my case, I've got grammar and more. It might say grammar and spelling. It might have a number of different options here depending on which version you're using. But I want it to be most inclusive. So in this case, I'm going to choose grammar and more. And so in this case, I'm going to choose grammar and more, and then I'm going to click settings. And this brings up a huge list of stuff. And I really want everything checked. So, agreement between the noun and adverb, noun phrases, capitalization of March and May. Those are months that may or may not be months. They are also regular words. Comma after greetings. Just essentially turn everything on. Even here, you see I have some that are turned off. I'm going to turn these all on because I want all of these to be flagged when I'm writing, because these are all common stylistic and grammatical things that we want to focus on. Definitely turn on contractions. We want to use a very formal language. I want it to be flagged if I'm too informal. I want slang flagged. Essentially, 90% of what we are looking for, we want to be it's right here in this dialog box. The Oxford comma, that's that comma that says I've got 3 items in a list. Do I put a comma after the second one before the and or the or? I would think that for 90% of your writing, you would want that comma. I gave an example the other day in one of my classes where I had 2 items, and then I put the comma and the word and then I had 2 items that were essentially grouped together. And so that comma was necessary to differentiate between the first and, which linked the first 2 and what came after that, from the 2 that are separated by an and that are in that last final portion of that particular phrase. So by turning on the Oxford comma, that will ensure that you always have that third one. Punctuation required within quotes should be set to inside, and space between sentences should be set to 1 space. Now the default used to be 2 under typewriters because every letter was the same width, whether it was a W or an I. And to provide a little bit of breathing room between sentences, make it easier to find the end of a sentence, the default for academic writing using typewriters used to be 2 spaces. Now that we use proportional fonts, and you will be using Times New Roman or something very close to that, we only need the 1 space. And so that actually, in a short document it doesn't make a big difference, but in a long document that can make a huge difference as far as the spacing and all that. So essentially I want all of these turned on. The more of these that we turn on, the more that that word will flag the problems, and the more likely we are to fix them, and the more likely you are to give me a paper that is as close to perfect as you can possibly get. So far I've shown you how to do the page numbers, including keeping the first page blank. I've shown you how to set your default paragraph settings so that you have proper double-space format for academic papers, and I've shown you how to set the grammar and style and spelling options in the proofing tool to basically check for everything, and that should almost instantaneously improve your writing, because as it flags more and more issues, you'll go back, you'll address them, and you probably turn in some of the best papers you've ever written in your entire collegiate career. Okay, so this part of the video I want to talk about doing citations. And of course, this is important because if you do it wrong or you don't do it at all, you're not going to do well. If you don't do it, you're going to get a 0. If you do it in the wrong style, you're going to get a 0 on your paper. So I want to make sure that you know how to do this. And so I've got here a document. This is a book I wrote a few years ago. That's where the the pages are kind of small. This is off the final version that went to the printer. And I want to show you how to insert a citation. And this is, it's not really that difficult, but students often have a hard time figuring out where to go to do this. So I want to take you step by step. So I want to stick a citation right here. The information that precedes this comes from a book by Deborah Weber, a UC Riverside professor, and I have taken information from there. It's not a quote, but this is where the information came from, and I want to make sure that I tell the reader where I got that information. I didn't just pull it out of my hat or some other part of my body. This is Chicago footnote, or Turabian. So we put the cursor right after the period. Now, if you were doing inline, it would go before the period, but with footnotes, it goes right there, right after the period. Go to References. Here is what we need to worry about, right here, this insert footnote. Right? So we also have endnotes. That's another issue. And the beauty of doing it this way is that Word keeps track. And you can have both endnotes and footnotes. You can also convert footnotes to endnotes and vice versa. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. So what we're going to do here is we're going to insert a footnote at that particular place. Now, I don't need to know what the last footnote number was because Word's taking care of it. All I have to do is insert the footnote, and all of the automatic stuff, including repetitions and all that, will be handled completely by itself. So let's do insert footnote. And that would go right where I have the cursor. And then for some reason it wanted to do 2. So there we go. And then I just type in what I want to have in there. And there you go. You'll notice that the other footnotes are at 9 point. This defaulted to a 10 point. We could have changed the style for that, but we'll just drop it down 1 and it'll fit in. So now you see that we have the author, then comma, so it's first name last in the footnotes. So it's author, comma, the book title in italics, then in parentheses the city where it was published, the publisher, a comma, the year, close parentheses, and a period. Now, if it had multiple authors, you would do this, you would put them all before the comma. The commas are what separate the items in the footnotes. Now, we then have to take that same entity, or that same entry, and go to the works cited page, which should be at the very, very end. And we were doing Weber, so she actually is near the end. And you will see here it is. Now, it is a little different. It starts off with last name, comma, first name. Then it should be a period, which is missing. So let's put the period in. And then it is dark sweat, white gold, California farm workers, cotton and the New Deal, all italics. Then a period. See, in this part, it's periods. The other part is comma. Then no parenthesis, the city, colon, the press, the publisher, comma, the year, no close parentheses, and period. So let's go back to where we inserted that first one, that initial, that footnote 102. Show you a couple of things here. Let's say that we're going to do a second footnote, and I want to make sure I get it between 102 and 103. So let's just add some space here and do another insert footnote so we have it. Now, if I'm taking from exactly the same document, same author, the same everything, then I would just simply put in lowercase IBID period. That shouldn't have capitalized that. That's one of the problems with having all that stuff turned on. But there you go. That just says what happened before. It's a repeat of that. Now, if the initial entry had page numbers, let's say that this was 424. I don't know if that book has that many pages, but let's just say it's 424. And this one actually came from page 32. We would just specify it that way. If we had a different book by Professor Weber that was already addressed earlier in the document, we would go Weber, Well, no, let me explain it. If this were not immediately after, let's say that it's 2 or 3 down. Let's say that it's after 105, and so it would be showing up at the bottom of the page. And we can actually move that by taking this new one. I'm going to take it and move it down to here, so it goes down some. So now the IBID is pointing to colored labor. We don't want that one. We want it to point back to the one that we really want, which is the Deborah Weber. So all we do is do, and it's done. That's as easy. Oh, it should be a comma there. That's it. If there were multiple books by Weber that we were citing, then we would have to put the titles in. So you repeat what you need to and you eliminate what you don't need to. And so that's really the basics on how to do the basics for footnote citations, Turabian-style citations in Word. So now I want to get to talking about block quotes, and you'll see there are 2 pages here from this document that are just filled with quotations. Much of this particular portion of this document I was citing a lot of theory, and so I used the words of the theorists themselves and then put my commentary and my linking information between the quotes. So here's a long quote from Bourdieu, and you'll see that it's indented on both sides, so you half an inch on each side so that it lines up perfectly right here with the regular paragraph indent. That way it just makes it neater as it does that. By indenting on this side over here, you also get a much cleaner break between the single-spaced block quote and the double-spaced text that is mine. You'll notice that there is no quotation marks at the beginning or at the end. Because you've got it set up as a block, it's already flagged that this is a quote, and then of course the citation is at the end. So you can see you come to the end of your regular thought in your paragraph, you hit enter, you come down. I would just type this all in. And going back to the styles that we talked about before, you'll notice I have a block quote style here. And essentially it does all of this formatting. It single spaces everything. It indents everything a half an inch. It doesn't indent the first line an additional half inch, and it indents this side at a half inch. So basically all I have to do is just put the cursor in the middle of the paragraph. It's a block quote, push the button, and it becomes a block quote. That's the easiest way to do this, and that's why styles become so important. If you set up styles for normals, for headings, for block quotes, much of your work can be automated. If you're writing a large document, the headings can be used to set up a table of contents. There's one other thing I wanted to point out about the block quotes, and that is the paragraph that follows. Now, everything that's on these 2 pages, you'll notice I have a paragraph, I have the block quote, and then I start a new paragraph. Now, if, and in this case again this is just for illustration, but let's say that my intention was that this block here is actually part of the paragraph that includes this and this. In other words, this follows on in the same paragraph. Rather than indent here, I would take this first line and remove the indent. That means that starting up here at Michael de Certeau and going all the way to here is a single paragraph. Otherwise, if this was the way it had been, this would be a paragraph, and this would be considered a paragraph. So this is why the indenting is so important. If we don't indent the first line of each paragraph, we really, especially when it comes to using block quotes, we really aren't clear if it's a new paragraph or it's a continuation of an existing paragraph. This really only covers the basics, what you need in order to write a paper for one of my classes. I think most of this will be applicable to your other classes. Spend some time knocking around the menus in Word and trying to learn some of the functions. You'll find that they're extremely useful, they're very powerful, and each of them makes your life so much easier. So I really encourage you to experiment and play, and I'm looking forward to your papers. Thanks for watching.